Welcome to the Human Design Collective podcast, where we explore the system as a map of our unique potential, from the mundane to the mystical. If you'd like to dive deeper into your design, we invite you to check out our ongoing foundation courses and workshop offerings at courses.humandesigncollective.com. Our next Living Your Design workshop begins in June, followed by Rave ABCs on July 16th. We're also offering the Modern Love workshop in July, exploring relational mechanics in the current age. For more information and to register, please visit courses.humandesigncollective.com. In this episode, we're speaking with Peter Schöber, a 3-5 emotional generator and longtime professional human design teacher. In this second conversation with Peter, we delve into how he came to work with transits and developed his unique approach. We discuss the experience of feeling the transit's energy before and after events, and explore the conditioning influences on different types. Peter shares his insights on the closed aura of manifestors and the importance of informing, and we touch upon view and perspective. Additionally, we discuss solar returns, major cycles, and unpack the channel 3955 with its themes of provocation, abundance, and spirit. Peter's frequency awareness and wisdom are a grounding force for those looking to find their way in these transformative times. We hope you enjoy the show. First, I wanted to say thank you for coming to talk with us again, Peter. And I really am excited to actually get to personally thank you for the work you've been doing with the transit forecasting. I've been listening to it now for a couple years, and I have just found it to be such a grounding, helpful, supportive view on things. So thank you for creating that and continuing to provide that for those of us that are ready to hear it. So I'm curious about how that way of looking at the transits, my experience of it is so clear and it's structured in a very simple, direct way. But for people who maybe haven't listened to it yet, there's a structure that includes a look through the lens of the collective as well as how it may affect us each personally based on our own design. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about how that structure, how that format, or how you developed your way, your style of doing that processing of the transits. Can you tell us about that?
Well, that was pretty a long way, I have to say. I started to get interested in transits more than 30 years ago. So pretty much on the beginning of my process. First of all, because obviously Ra made us aware of the importance of that. And secondly, even with that time relatively superficial understanding, it was so obvious. It was so obvious that the program is working. And my interest from the very beginning was not only or even preferably about myself, but about the collective. Or let's say the world. Let's just say the world, because the world is the total marionette of the transit field. It is frightening. It's a little bit frightening. And of course, I'm very, let's say, future orientated. I'm a very logical person. So for me, the prognosis is the final proof if I understood correctly. If I can somehow grasp, obviously in a general way, but still, if I can somehow grasp what is coming, then my understanding, for example, of the gates is correct. If I cannot yet, I still have to learn something. And that is maybe the most fascinating aspect. The transit allows you to learn from life itself. That you have to start with, let's say, getting in touch with human design concepts. And I mean, let's be honest, these are just concepts. So these are very general formulas. They can turn out in life in many different costumes, in many different forms. And by watching what's going on in the world and relating that to the transit field, I mean, I have learned an incredible lot of gates, for example, by just watching the transit and what has been come out of that. So that is, for me, one of the most fascinating aspects of my process.
What would you say it's shown you about humanity?
You really want to know?
Yes.
That always the worst is to be expected. If I look in the world as a general, it is so obvious how it is in the grip of the program. And obviously, yes, the program has a goal, so to speak, or maybe not a goal, but a direction. And now we are pretty fastly moving in that direction. Right? We are approaching. And let's say since the Corona crisis, you can see it each day approaching. Right? It was exactly 7 years before 2027. No, it was actually later. It was in the middle, exactly. It was in the middle. So it is like of these Greek tragedies. Have you ever seen a Greek tragedy? When I was in school, I learned Old Greek. So Oedipus Rex, that is the best possible example. You know from the very first second, this will not end well. And then it is unfolding. And this is a little bit what I see.
One of the things that we notice a lot is that there seems to be the view on all the things that are not going well and that seem to be on their trajectory of not going well. And there are a lot of people who seem to be looking to some way to bring out some sort of positive light or spin it in some sort of positive way or find a way to look towards some sort of hope or positivity for the future.
Yeah, I know.
How do you view that?
Let's say in a two-folded way. One is the individual perspective, you and me. Okay, we can have our way, let's say on difficult ground, but we still can have our way. And then, as far as I can say, it doesn't harm you. I mean, strategy and authority is the miracle, and it can lead you through everything. So it's no reason on the personal level, I do not need to be afraid. On the other hand, of course, this world must go down because it cannot be repaired. This world we have now is the pure materialization of the not self. And it is so powerful. On the one hand, it is so powerful. And on the other hand, this is so stupid. You cannot repair it. There is no reform that can change that. So therefore, it must get destroyed by the program, because if not, the alternative would be the total extinction right now. So what we are going through, one can say, is the better variation, but it doesn't mean that it will be beautiful. So, and I'm sorry, I'm not the type of for positive thinking. Yeah. So I'm a 3-5, I'm a pessimist. I try to have a very clear observation. My motivation is fear and not hope.
So the world, you said, is the marionette of the program. The program's basically directing, controlling, or influencing what's going on a global level. But it sounds like what you're saying is that there is some space for the individual in a way to meet these influences, to meet the conditions.
Exactly.
And through strategy and authority as a tool that we have, a major tool, but within that dynamic between the individual and the transitory influences or the conditions, that maybe there's a way for the individual. I don't know what we can say about that.
No, yeah, that is exactly, let's say, the divide you have in a transit forecast. Let's say something like 50% is about the collective development, and the other 50% is what does that mean for you personally, given the concrete situation in your body graph. So, for example, now we had almost 3 years with Pluto in the 60, more or less everybody knows that. But it affects you differently depending from if you have gate 3, or you have a defined route, or you have an open route. That's the one thing. And the other thing is, of course, everything is a challenge, but also an opportunity. So it may not be nice to experience the limitation, but the surfacing of your old limitations is also the possibility to overcome them, or at least to become aware of them, and in that sense, make a step in your own process. And this is the freedom of the individual, if you want, because the transit is a conditioning, and the conditioning is not meant to make my decisions. But if I'm aware of that, first of all, I can use what the transit is offering. It's also offering something, also a little bit depending from the details of my body graph. And if I know what is influencing me, it is easier not to become just an unconscious victim of that.
It seems also then there's the potential to know that it's also not forever.
Yeah, very good point. Because if you are really in a bad situation or a bad inner state, that feels like hell forever.
Yeah.
And the truth is, nothing is forever. This sometimes are bad news and sometimes it's good news. In these situations, it's good news. Yeah, nothing is forever.
I have noticed that there are some interpretations, and I guess that this comes from just your own experience of the effect on yourself through your own understanding. But some of these transits, it does seem like you interpret them with a more positive effect. Like you're recently talking about the 63 coming in, and if you have the 4, that could actually be something for an undefined head, for example, that
Yeah.
could actually be experienced more positively. Has
Mhm.
most of that been through observation in other people or through the experience in your own design of how the transits affect you personally?
I would say all sources. One source, of course, is, I may say, a relatively deep understanding. Secondly, in this specific case, definitely also the observation of myself. I have an open mind and gate with my both Plutos in gate 4. So I definitely know how it feels to have then the channel of the logic. And also, of course, by observation. And there are many, many dialogues. If I teach, and teaching is my main profession, let's say, and my seminars, I'm not just teaching. We are always applying what I'm teaching with the body graphs of the participants. And this means that I get a lot of stories and feedbacks. And this since a very long time in many, many different countries. So it has a certain, let's say, it gives a huge spectrum of that.
Mm.
This is the second most important source of learning.
You must have gotten to see a lot of different cultural influence as well in that way, to work with people from different places, and then
Yeah.
also see what's universal, what no one is escaping.
Yeah, that is the fascinating thing that a little bit was to be expected. The mechanic we see in the body graph works everywhere. There is, in that sense, no cultural differentiation. The cultural differentiation may lay in the justification of mind. So you can justify the not self pattern with different concepts. And in one country, that may be religious concepts, and in another one, there may be materialistic concepts, or whatever may be the case. But the mechanic itself is just the mechanic. And this is to be found everywhere. As far as I can say. Obviously, I did not travel all the planets, but let's say I had a pretty interesting choice.
Do you work with solar returns personally in your work?
Cycles are my next passion. So solar return, but especially also the big cycles. It is also, everything that is somehow connected with prognosis has always very much attracted my attention. And actually, if I want to understand the period of the life of myself or somebody else, you need both perspectives. You need to see what is indicated in the cycle, and you need to see what will come by the transit. Because the transit is at least partly not contained in what you see in the cycle, but still it will affect you during the time you are going through the cycle. So therefore, it is like the left eye and the right eye, and together you see 3D.
Yeah, it comes from a question that I've been looking at. I guess it's more of a technical or mechanical question where you have the solar return or a cycle being a symbolic chart that represents a time period as opposed to tracking the actual transits through time and when they're on and off gates. And I've always been fascinated with that mechanism. Well, it's like our birth chart in a sense, right? There's a chart that we have when we come into the world with our birth imprint that then carries through the life. And it seems like these cycle charts, in a way, are operating in a similar manner where there is an imprint at a certain point that's then carried out into the future for a certain duration of time beyond when those transits would have been in effect, technically by degree.
Yeah. The cycle body graph shows you a part of your genetic that is unfolding in a specific time. I mean, all your solars are fixed in the moment of your birth.
Mhm.
So obviously they are a direct outcome of your genetics. It doesn't look so on the surface, because on the surface many things look like they are happening to me. Yeah? But nothing is happening by chance. So in that sense, it is a part of the unfolding. I mean, the birth chart is like the seed of a tree. And everything the tree can become is already put in there. But what will become of the tree depends from the time and the circumstances. And okay, the circumstances you cannot calculate. That's this one insecurity you cannot pass over. That is the ring pass not. But the rest is, yeah, you can calculate it. You have it. So I see the year, for example, a solar that is the small chapter. The big cycles, these are, many big books. They have part 1, 3, 4, 5. And within these parts, they have chapters. And the solar would be the chapter in the Saturn return or in your Venus opposition or whatever you want to look at.
Related to that, something I've been also watching or experiencing at times is the after effects of a transit. A transit has come in, like let's say the 360, and there's been a process of mutation in the field.
Mhm.
Pluto moves out of gate 60 temporarily, at least right now, but it moves on. I was still feeling very much an energy and a frequency of mutation, just generally. And it just felt like the 360 was still kind of in effect, almost like an echo or a rippling effect from the event, and kind of carries out into the future in a way, which kind of, I think, makes sense that these transits represent events that do have a kind of a movement, a trajectory or a pattern that continues out into the future in a sense.
I do absolutely agree. We can have a little bit more detailed look at that. When we are talking about long-term transits, like Pluto, for example, first of all, we have to reflect that then, let's say, approximately for 3 years, all born children have gate 60 with Pluto. So the transit is incarnating. Now, with the daily changing transits, you do not observe that so clearly because they are more or less repeating in a yearly rhythm. Yeah, like the Sun, Earth, and Mercury and Venus, and okay, Mars is a little bit slower. But with the really long-term transits, there are Plutonian qualities, they are not incarnated. Yeah, that's very important if you work with the refugee. There are several exaltations and detriments. They are not incarnated right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then Pluto comes to a gate. Now it was gate 60. And then a generation is incarnating who has Pluto in the 60. So Pluto in the 60 does not go away for the next 80, 90 years. That's the one thing. On a more personal level, I would say, this is my personal hypothesis, that if a transit is longer than 88 degrees of sun, it goes into the body. It kind of gets stored in the body. And that doesn't mean it will stay forever, but it stays for some time. That's what you have called the echo. Yeah, it's a very good description. It is like an echo. It does not go away immediately. It's more like it is fading away over time, but not fast and maybe not totally. And thirdly, of course, okay, now the Pluto goes on to the 48, but it comes after having been in the 60. That is a story. That is not this and that totally separated from each other.
Right.
It's the 41 after the 60. And this you cannot change. That is the program. That is the structure in the program, apart from the nodes. It would be the other way around. So at least these three factors, I would say, working together.
Okay. That makes sense. And so, yeah, the first point is that when someone is born into the world under a transit, they're going to carry that frequency as long as they're on the planet. And that's another way that it just persists. That makes total sense. Yeah, they kind of embody that energy in a sense.
Mhm, mhm.
So then not only is there an echo, but it sounds like there's also potentially the pre-echo in a way. Do you see that as well? That there's a way we can sense what is coming, or that there's an effect of what is coming before it's here? Or not so much?
You have really good questions, guys. Look, I'm deeply convinced that the body knows what is coming at least 3 months in advance. I definitely have experiences. They cannot be explained in another way. And of course, my mind has not access to that. My mind can observe that my body is telling me to do something or not to do something, and it doesn't understand why. My mind can be like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah.
But sometimes it becomes visible. I mean, I have a very, very striking example for that. As you definitely will be aware about these yearly meetings in Ibiza. And of course, for being a human design professional now since more than 30 years, that was obviously a very important event for me. And I went there, of course I did. And in the later years also teaching there. And then were this first year when it was not made in Ibiza, but in Toronto. So I went there to Toronto, and I love this city. When I was a very young man, I once had worked in Canada for a short time, and there I also was, also not in Toronto, but I have seen it, let's say. So I liked it very much there. We had a good event, everything. So the next year it was again in Toronto, and I didn't have any response. I did not have any response. I did not buy a ticket. I did not book a hotel, nothing. Yeah, that was the year when Ra died. I was the only one who did not need to cancel the flight. This is what I mean. Huh? This somehow my body knew.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's wild.
Mm-hmm.
Body knows, like you said,
Yeah.
in a way that doesn't make sense to us.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the sense comes always later, if at all. So that's the law.
There's a question that comes up often in Amy and I teach the foundation courses, and one of the questions that will sometimes come up is about the conditioning influences or the conditioning priorities according to different types, where projectors and generators are said to be more conditioned by the interpersonal auric field, and manifestors and reflectors more in tune with the transit influences, the program influences. That seems to be kind of an idea going around. And have you seen that in your practice, that different types are going to interface with the transit program differently or be more or less affected, or do you think that holds up?
I'm not totally sure. What I would say I can observe for sure is that the influence of the transit will be stronger the more open the body graph is, not surprisingly. That for me looks pretty clearly. I'm absolutely sure with generators and projectors that they get pretty strongly conditioned, but also by the transit field, I'm sorry. These manifestors, yeah, I have my little heresies. There is this so-called closed aura of the manifestor. And as a general description, I consider that to be not true. First of all, I have experience I have a daughter that is a splenic manifestor with exactly the same design as Ra, but in the 6-2 variation. And she has mentally, she has a different construct. Splenic ego manifestor. Of course, my first wife was a manifestor, and so I have some close experience with manifestors, and also sometimes, let's say, in my social field. And what I experience is the aura of the manifestor closes totally if they want to do something. This is the information, the auric information, go out of my way now.
Closed in action.
Yeah. And this you can already observe with very little manifestors. I mean, even the guy is 6 years old, but if he wants to do something, you would not go in that way. Also, let's say not without a really serious reason. And now at the same time, of course, I was asking myself, so why could it be that Ra was teaching that? The closed aura of the manifesto as a general assumption. And I have a suspicion, a theory. Before human design, you didn't know that you should inform. So what is practically the experience of each manifestor? That always somebody is in your way. Always somebody tries to interfere. And then I consider this closed aura that is like a response to the experience. It is like if always is somebody there in my way, I always need to be in this mode, kind of. Don't interfere, don't interfere, don't interfere. And if you have, on the other hand, if you have this experience that it is not always like that there are settings, that there are settings or specific people, you do not need to be afraid of that. Then you can allow yourself also to be open in some settings. And so this is something that will prove itself over time. The more manifestor children are brought up by their parents in an appropriate way, the more sure we will find out if they are still, let's say, in this defense mode, actually, as ongoingly or not. So coming back to your original question, I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. I mean, specifically for reflectors, they need this lunar program for specific purposes, as they have this special connection with the moon. One can understand that, but I would not like to give really an answer to the question.
That's fascinating what you're saying about the manifestor aura, though. Well, some of it's due to their experience in the world and conditioning. Probably going to vary for individual.
I was absolutely, my awareness was put to that because I had manifestors, they got really angry when everybody told them about their closed aura. They said, I'm sometimes closed and sometimes not. So therefore, this was, again, all my investigations come from experience. So if I meet it along the way and I cannot understand it, I try to find out. It was not any original theory or suspicion.
I wanted to come back to what you said about the cycles and that we love and enjoy looking at the major cycle transits. And then also thinking about this work now that you've been putting out in this really regular way with the analysis of the quarterly transits. And now I'm looking at your nodes and wondering how you view that in terms of your relationship with what you've been drawn to see and share. As the focus of your work, it seems like you're kind of a fascinating bridge in a way.
You mean my perspective? Do you mean not?
And I'm just looking at the themes, having the 3740 and the 5955.
Yeah.
Just having those polarities in your nodal definition.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty tribal, let's be honest. I mean, a tribal 3-5. We all have some problems. But things go now in my last note, so. What I can observe from the perspective, it is really more I have the survival view. So motivation, fear, survival view. So on the one hand, I'm pretty able to survive, that's for sure. And on the other hand, this is what my mind is really interested in. It is like you always can find out about your motivation, what is your true motivation in the now, if you are scrolling through some news feed. Where you make a stop, this is what your mind is interested in. And there are no surprises in my case. 80% of everything my mind will never be interested in. And so it really has its specialization. And this can be lived out, let's say, and also be of value exactly in this, let's say, contemplation of the transit field.
Yeah. So what is it that you love about the major cycles in analysis?
First of all, they contain much more information because there you practically always have a different cross. So you have this challenge to understand how your birth cross, your natal cross, is expressed in a specific time and what that means for your teaching and personal development, let's say the requirements. Then they give you a specific perspective. Its big cycle is not just a prognosis for a long time. each of these big cycles has a specific perspective. So even if you would have exactly the same element, it doesn't mean the same. So this is also very interesting and actually helpful for your own process. And it is, for me, it's a little bit like this is the waving of life. In these cycles, you see the waving of life. And this is as close as you can come to look over the shoulder of God. This is, for me, a very joyful experience.
Yeah.
And the plan is always very beautiful. There is no cycle that is not totally beautiful. But the not-self fucks up everything, so it's not a guarantee.
Yeah, I feel the same. It's like reading a novel, reading a great story.
Yeah.
And whether we enjoy it or how we meet it or not, it's in a way, it's in support of our development. Do you see it's part of the unfolding of the life? And these are the stages, these are the major kind of, like you said earlier, chapters that we go through to learn, to grow, to develop, to ultimately express our life.
Yeah, there is, of course, you can see, let's say, what qualities you have to meet along your way. But first, of course, it doesn't tell you how exactly that will happen. Secondly, it doesn't tell you how you will be able to cope with that. It is, on the one hand, it is really totally fixed, as we can calculate it from the very beginning, and yet nothing is fixed. Yeah, you can have two people could have totally the same solar, and for the one it would be a fascinating, interesting year, and for the other one it would be a totally catastrophe.
Mm.
So in the end, your decisions will decide what comes out of it. And your spirit. And your spirit. The spirit is very important, and the spirit cannot be found in the body graph.
Mhm.
It is something that is not to be seen, so to speak, and its spirit is not a mechanic.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up spirit. And as I hear you now, I hear spirit almost as a type of being or frequency or something. I don't, if you're saying it's not found in the body graph, it's not a mechanic, it's something beyond that. Like the spirit is the I-ness, the me-ness. I don't, how would you describe spirit in this way?
Now, we could call it a very strong inner attitude, how you meet the life. And very simple, there are people, they always meet the things from the point of view of the victim. So they become endlessly victims. And on the one hand, and we have the channel of initiation right now, so it is the appropriate moment. And then you have, let's say, that warrior spirit, and that means I'm ready to meet everything. And I may not, I'm totally helpless in the sense I cannot change the circumstances, but I can meet them as myself. And that makes a big difference.
Mm.
And for me, that is coming out of a spirit.
I think it's one of the main things that I've gotten from your talks, especially with, Pluto and 60 being so persistent over these last couple years. That message that I keep hearing from you about, even if we cannot control the circumstances around us, we can transform and progress in our attitude, in a way, in how we meet the things that we can't control.
No, and actually, we need challenges. No? If you would not have challenges, you would just degenerate. I mean, growth is always outside of the comfort zone. And people are so much in favor of comfort zones. What do you have? A world in degeneration.
We were talking about the 3955 and sort of observing it, and we kept coming across that phrase that gets tossed around about something Ross said about how if you have the 3955 and someone is provoked by you, then they're not correct for you. So we were curious about your experience of that
Oh,
provocation.
that is a long story, but an interesting one. I agree. Okay, starting with the provocation, because you mentioned it, I have both my awareness in the 39. So conscious and unconscious, obviously. And therefore, there is sometimes I really like to provoke. And sometimes it's just happening and I was not aware. And provocation, yeah, of course, theory says actually rightly, if you are always provoking somebody in the sense of they feel provoked by what you are doing, this is not an environment you need. It would just create unnecessary pressure actually for both sides. Why should you? But not to overlook, the 39 is also the sexual provocation. And in this aspect, it can be very nice. And then you are more interested in the ones you can provoke. So everything has two sides. But of course, the 39 as itself is, how shall I say, it's not very intelligent game. No? It is a pressure, it is a mechanical ability and pressure. They're bringing mutative pressure, actually. And if you have the channel, it is like for a reason. If you know it or not, it's not like you have to be conscious of that. And what you are really looking for, of course, is abundance. And you cannot avoid the topic because the emotional experience is so extreme. When I was 7 years old, I tried for the first time to kill somebody. I was so angry. You cannot imagine how angry I was. And therefore, there are two experiences you have. One, everybody tells you don't be so emotional because this is just too much. For most people, it's just too much. No matter what kind of emotion it is. I'm not only talking about the, let's say, bad emotions. It also could be too passionate. It could be too this, to that. It's always too much. And this is the greatest danger because, after all, this is emotion. This is about moving out something. But everybody tells you don't, keep it in yourself. On the other hand, with this intensity, you must learn to control it somehow. Yeah, this you cannot in the social field live that quality. Yeah, it is too much. And if it is ruling you, it really also could easily lead to damage, to serious damage. And this is a learning process that goes as it goes. And one can only hope that, let's say, the system and the body is, let's say, clever enough to find some ways to balance that out. I was, for example, always in my life, I was making a lot of sports, especially when I was a young man, I was really professional sportsman. And that definitely has reduced my pressure. It was one very effective way to reduce the pressure. And on the other hand, that is not that it is always a root channel. Net the 55 is like a tuning fork. It can totally tune into somebody. I mean, I have all motors defined, you know by design, right? So it's pretty, let's say, pretty stable, yeah, in the sense of energy, but it can be totally sensitive. As far as I can observe, one part of that comes from this ability to tune into somebody. And the other is that I have a certain talent for empathy. So I can really put myself in the shoes of somebody else. And this allows, let's say, a kind of connection. Yeah. But this 55 really can be totally rude and overwhelming, and it can also be something extremely fine. Okay, and because you have so different emotional experiences, your awareness gets turned to the topic. I mean, if you can experience the most beautiful and the most terrible emotional states, you obviously are trying to be in the good, in the pleasurable, joyful ones. So this starts the, let's say, the quest for happiness or the quest for abundance. Yeah, and that is individual, it's mutative, so there is no fixed way to that. There will be your personal road, your personal journey, let's say, that very likely will lead through many chapters. If you have a C5, you can bet on that. And you will find, of course, you will find abundance, and you will find emptiness. And the question is, what is actually abundance? I mean, all emotional quality is transitory. I mean, we have it in the, let's say, metaphor of the wave. And okay, the 55 is more pulses, but it's exactly the same. So we have pulsating, changing emotional states. But the deep question, the mutational question is there a stable abundance? Is there a stable abundance or not? And this leads us like in the last consequence to the search for the spirit. It's the gate of the spirit. And the spirit, we all usually are looking for happiness or abundance by having something on the outside. You are chasing something or somebody because this will make you happy. And sometimes it does. For 1 day or for 3 years. But it's not, sorry. And often it runs away. And often if you get it, it doesn't make you happy. So maybe spirit, man. So we can agree the spirit is very likely inside and not outside. So the question is how to approach the spirit, how to get in touch with the spirit. And the spirit is a mood. The spirit is definitely a mood. Again, there are very personal, individual ways, but there is one way everybody can start with, and it's not difficult. You have to start to acknowledge what you have. The spirit of abundance comes from starting to see the abundance you have already. And as most people are fixed on what they have not, they are in the spirit of poverty or emptiness. And they complain. That is the endless complaint. And this is exactly what leads to hell and does practically not allow any betterment. So gratitude and acknowledgement are very good starting points.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for your spirit. Thank you for bringing it to us. It's a gift. Can you tell us, what are you doing now? Are you teaching mostly local where you are? Are you teaching what levels, or how are you available to people?
Naja, I'm teaching, also my main markets, quote unquote. My main markets is German language and also Russian, wobei I myself, my Russian is very bad. So I teach in English and have very good translators. These are the two main fields. And then along my road, I've also taught in Ukraine, in Kazakhstan, in the UK. I'm a little bit working with Jovian, as you know. So, but this is, let's say, little extra adventures. I have a steady teaching relationship with Italy. Then now also teaching since many, many years, but not so much. Not so much. Constantly, but not so much. And my availability, honestly, is not very high because I'm practically on my limit. Or let's say I'm practically on that limit I would not like to step over. Yeah. So I'm now 72. I also need a little bit of regenerations and I like to travel, and this is very important for me. So I have my 2 seasons and then I have my vacation.
Good.
And also, it's the age where you have to bring your heritage out. So I'm now publishing a lot of books and all of that. So
Will they be in English?
no, they are, also the main is in German. There is my first book is also available in English at Amazon. I think it's some print on demand.
Yes.
But in German I have a lot more. So, but it comes as it comes. My first book has been translated to Korean. Okay. As long as nobody asks me, nothing to do.
Well,
Yeah.
your book on the centers is one of my favorite human design books, and I'm very glad it's available in English. And like Amy said, maybe we should be learning German. We could read more of your books.
Naja, this leads back to a question you asked me totally at the beginning about my structure. My suspicion is that my structure is so clear because my command of the English language is limited. I mean, I always was very fascinated with language, and I dare say, in German language, I'm really good. I mean, I have all these, let's say, refinements and small differences and connections at my disposal. And obviously, in a language that is not my mother tongue, I have not. So this forces me to be very simple. And at the same time, that is supporting a very clear structure. So everything has two sides.
Yes. That's what I realized right from the start of engaging with it. And I would imagine it not being your native language. But this is like everything you've been saying about limitation or constriction in a way. That limitation or that pressure or that constriction of not having full, masterful, broad command of a language has actually brought out a structure that's very simple, very essential, very clear. And I feel like in those recordings, what comes across from you then is just it's almost like every sentence feels like it's a very essential, simple, clear, direct message. That's how I've experienced it.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, it also comes from the time, one has to say. No?
yeah.
Um, but it is, yeah, I try to transmit the essence.
Mhm.
This is definitely true.
Yeah. Well, you've done it very well. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Good to see you again.
It was really a pleasure. Yeah, have a good time and a lot of success.
Yes. Thank you again for coming on to talk with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Human Design Collective podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please review us and share. You can find us at humandesigncollective.com and explore our course and workshop offerings at courses.humandesigncollective.com. Music for the Human Design Collective podcast is courtesy of Meg Ruby and Anders Parker. For more information, see the show notes. And please stay tuned for upcoming episodes on the same channel.